All right. Well, as we wait for the speaker, I'm going to go ahead and maybe try to kick us off here. I want to be respectful of the pro tem's time. So with that, I will turn it over to Katrina quickly to introduce our guest today, and we'll get right underway.
Sounds good, Max. I'll go ahead and introduce Speaker Moyle. So when he jumps in, that will already be done as well. So I'll start with Speaker Moyle. He is going into his third Idaho legislative session in the top spot in House leadership and has served his constituents for 13 terms in the Idaho House of Representatives. He served the House Republican Caucus as Assistant Majority Leader and Majority Leader prior to being elected Speaker of the Idaho House of Representatives. Pro Tem Anthon is going into his first Idaho legislative session in the top spot in Senate leadership and into his sixth term representing his constituents in the Idaho Senate. He has served his colleagues as the Senate Republican Caucus Chair, Majority Leader, and now as Senate Pro. Oh my goodness, that's a mouthful, Senator Anthon. Senate President Pro Tem. So Speaker Moyle and Pro Tem Anthon, thank you for joining Idaho Realtors from all over the state today. We're super excited to hear from you and to get your perspective on the upcoming legislative session. So with that, I'll kick it back to Max to kick us off.
Great. Well, thank you, Katrina, and again, thank you to Pro Tem Anthon. The speaker keeps texting me that he's having trouble getting in, so we'll be working on that. But in the interim here, again, want to thank the Pro Tem. Appreciate his time. We're going to kind of just jump right in, and I'll start with this Pro Tem Anthon. Over the last couple of weeks, both the Idaho House of Representatives and the Idaho Senate had what is called the organizational session. Just curious, what is the organizational session, and why is it important?
Well, the organizational session is dictated by Idaho law and the Idaho Constitution. Every 2 years, the Idaho legislature convenes for a brief session to do several things. First, it kind of sets up the party structure. So prior to the actual legislative session, the organizational session, the evening before, and I can only speak to the Senate, but the evening before, the Idaho Republicans in the Senate gather together for a dinner. It's a closed door meeting. It's one of the most uncomfortable dinners you'll ever have, by the way, especially if you're running for leadership, because you can hardly eat anything that you have before you. It's usually a lovely dinner. And after dinner, that's where you have nominations and you give speeches and an election of our leadership. Now, the President Pro Tem of the Senate is actually elected by the entire body of the Senate. It's not just the Republicans. However, the Republicans having the majority that we have in the Senate, they do choose who they are going to put forward as the President Pro Tem before we get to the actual organizational session. And so that's the evening before. The actual organizational session itself is a process by which in the Senate, through a seniority system, we choose our seats. We designate which committees each member of the Senate will be on, who the chairman of those committees will be. And then we go through a formal notification process to the governor and the members of the House of Representatives that we are ready to do business for the next session. We adopt our rules. We swear in the Pro Tem, we swear in the Secretary of the Senate, and we are then ready to do business for the next legislative session. And then we adjourn sine die until January. And then the Constitution dictates that the first Monday after the new year, we begin business. So that's the organizational session in a nutshell. And we've done it, and we're ready to start January 6th.
Great, thank you for that, Pro Tem. I think that the speaker just popped on. Speaker, can you hear me? Can we hear him? Nick, can you maybe unmute him?
I don't see him on the call.
Okay, the number should be end in 6667, I believe.
I will tell you this, Max, the House has gotten smart. They've done away with the dinner.
Well, I was excited to talk to Moyle about, his perspective on the organizational session. So as we get his audio possibly working, we'll jump back to
Is
that.
it working now?
Oh, there you go, speaker. I hear you. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. That's a good sign. Sorry about that. I'm technologically impaired, I guess. What the heck?
Well, that's okay. I'm just surprised you're not on your combine right now.
Well, I should be. I've only got 8 acres left, though, so I'm almost done.
Well, speaker, thanks for joining. We did ask the pro tem about, over the last few weeks, the legislature on both sides of the rotunda went through the organizational session. I just asked him quickly about what is the organizational session? Why is it important? He mentioned about it being part of the Idaho Constitution. It's where you really leadership is determined by the caucus, and then committee chairs and chairmen are obviously determined as well. Do you have anything else to add to the organizational session as you and your caucus just went through the same thing?
Yeah, it's always stressful. The only one that's elected by the whole body on our side is the speaker, and I think the pro tem is the same on the Senate. The rest are done in caucus. The hard part about organizational session is when you accept the rules that you're going to abide by this coming session, and when you set, like you said, the committees. The hard part, though, is those committee assignments, because you can't give everybody what they want, and you try to balance where they will be the most effective and do the most good for the state and for themselves. And that's I always call it the splitting babies. That's the hard part, because you can't, everybody doesn't get what they want. And sometimes they get pretty upset. I think that's why our founding fathers had us come in, get sworn in the 1st of December, go home for a month so we could get over being mad at each other. But it works out in the end.
Interesting. So you think that that little cooling off period between early December and maybe the second week of January probably works out well, huh?
Well, it helps some of them, but not all of them. Most legislators are happy with what they get, but there's always, there's not everybody can be a chairman and all that stuff, and it makes it difficult. But it does. It works out.
So my next question is kind of in the same vein, but after every election cycle, we often hear about how many freshman lawmakers are coming in to each caucus on each side of the rotunda. Just curious, and I guess we'll start with you, Speaker. How many freshman lawmakers are in the House Majority Caucus this year? And then I'll pose the same question to the pro tem after you.
I don't ever look at it who's freshmen, so I really couldn't tell you. I didn't count them. The elections start with the May primary, right? And everybody gets stirred into a group. And I've never looked at them as freshmen or not. I just look at what they do, what they want to do, and how they're going to get there. I'm always careful about that. The Senate does, I think, more on seniority than the House does when it comes to committee assignments and where legislators go. On the House side, they're all put into committees and assignments based on the speaker. He has control of it. So the seniority doesn't play as much. So I don't look at it that way. When they pick their seats and stuff, the seniority does matter in their offices because they get to pick last. But and the freshman group, you always wonder which ones are going to be the ones that are going to be the ones that get things done, the ones that race the top, the ones that are going to be, actively involved with the process, and the ones that just watch the world go by. And you don't know that till you get into January. But I really don't know the exact number of freshmen. I never even looked that up. I apologize.
No, that's all right. Pro Tem, what about you? Any thoughts on incoming freshmen this year? How does that affect your decision process moving forward as far as committees, committee chairs, seniority? Does that play a larger role on the Senate side?
It absolutely does play a large role on the Senate side, and every pro tem kind of handles that differently. We have a unique caucus this year. It's a caucus that in the last 2 years, have kind of seen, I think, has had some turmoil. And I don't know if I should say turmoil, but certainly a division. And I think we have, don't hold me to it, I want to say 4 or 5 freshmen. And the decision I made when I was elected pro tem is to what I call play it straight. And I wanted to make sure that the caucus understood that I'm not playing favorites. I'm not going to choose one side or another. I'm not going to, have my team versus their team or anything like that. And so I use the seniority system very straight. And I think everybody should have a fair chance inside the caucus. And so I really relied on the seniority system this year, probably more heavily than other pro tems have in the last, maybe decades and decades. And so one of the things you see in the organizational session in the Senate at the very onset is the drawing of names out of a hat. So those who were newly elected had to do that in order to determine their seniority based on the fact that they were all elected the same day. And so that happened. And so those folks got to stand in line in determining what their first two committee assignments would be. So that helped, that did play a part in the determining of what their committee assignments would be. And so there is a process that went on in my office that was influenced heavily this year, not only in the assigning of committees, but also of the chairmanships.
Interesting. Well, I think it's always good for our Realtor members to kind of hear some of the subtle differences between the House side and the Senate side. So we appreciate you guys providing that context. I'll kind of move on to my next question, which I think is really one of the main reasons why we're having this meeting today. Is we'll start with you, Pro Tem. What are your priorities, not only for yourself this year, but for the Senate Majority Caucus? What would you see as, I guess, the priorities number one of the caucus, and maybe number two for yourself if they're different?
Well, I think that the answer in regards to the caucus is we don't know yet. And so, the caucus is new. There are a lot of new faces. There are returning faces of the caucus, like Jim Woodward, Senator Zito. These are members who have left the caucus and come back to the caucus. One of the things that I always try very hard to do in my years of leadership is to follow the cardinal rule that I never get ahead of my caucus. And I never speak out of turn with my caucus. So I try to really keep my finger on what does the majority of my majority caucus want to do? And that is sometimes very frustrating when I'm dealing with maybe my friend, the Speaker of the House, or maybe the governor. But the fact of the matter is we have not been able to caucus very much. And we've not been able to really determine what those priorities are. I will tell you that we are in that process right now. We're doing it kind of digitally. We are taking polls. We're in the process of working through our caucus chair to try to find what at least 2/3 of the caucus believe are the primary issues. I have a sense of it, but I think when you ask me what is the caucus agenda, we're going to find that out in the first week or two of the session. With regard to me personally, I do have some things that I'm working on. One of the things that I really focus on in my own representation of my district is, rural issues. One of the things that is happening in Idaho is that we're changing, and my district is very rural. My district is very focused on agriculture, and I think we're going to have to continue to address the ever-changing face of Idaho and how we continue to protect some of those rural interests as we continue to modernize, or urbanize, I should say. That will focus around water issues, will focus around small town rural issues, and economic development issues in particular. I guess that's it. I mean, I will tell you also that one of the things I've learned in being in leadership is that, and I think my friend, the Speaker of the House, might get a chuckle out of this, but the more that a member of leadership puts his name on a piece of legislation, probably the more problematic that legislation becomes. And so I'm gonna be busy being the pro tem enough that I don't have a lot of legislative priorities myself.
I kind of want to jump on the water issue a little bit, but before I do that, Speaker Moyle, same to you. What are kind of some of your personal priorities? How does that overlap with what you've been able to determine the caucus is ready and wanting to do this session? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay, I can do that. After the general election, you spend, once you get through that hurdle, you spend the next month, lobbying to be speaker again or pro tem or whatever you're doing there. And you get a pretty good feel for where everybody's at. And I've kind of got a list that I've kind of kept track of. And it's a broad list. It doesn't delve into the minutia of where they want to go in those different areas. But the broad topics on the House side that I heard the most of the last month and a half have been tax relief. We want to keep the budget reforms going. There's more that needs to be done there. I call them base budget, but on the maintenance budget process. And there's a lot of concern that we need to start bringing those budgets back. So you'll see some push on the House to that. The illegal immigration issue is not going away, especially with some of the more urban areas. And you'll see some stuff coming that way out of the House anyways. Medicaid reform's been talked about a lot. You're seeing a lot of meetings right now on Medicaid reform. There's a real concern that if we don't get Medicaid under control, we're in trouble. It's now surpassed education, and if we don't figure a way to rein that in, it's going to be an issue, and a lot of talk from the members on that. Remember this, the federal government is fundamentally broke, and they pay a good chunk of that Medicaid expense, but they have what's called the FMAP rate. And as they adjust that FMAP rate up and down, it has an impact on the general funds, which affects education, water, you name it, all of them fall into that. Last year they adjusted it. It cost the state $75 million in general funds. They've done it again this year. I would assume the cost of the state will be the same. So you're going to hear a lot about Medicaid reform. Election transparency. Those of you that watched this last election and saw all this out-of-state money that came in, there's going to be something done there. I don't know how far we can go on that, but if Idaho is not careful and we allow these literally millions of dollars to be dumped in here, yeah, it's going to be bad for Idaho. Somehow we've got to get some transparency there. We've got to do what we can to prevent them from abusing the system, some kind of maybe truth in advertising. The lies that were said about many legislators, myself included this last time, were insane. You had races like mine that there was over $500,000 spent in those races. Somehow the state of Idaho has got to get control of that or we're all in trouble. And of course, the school choice issue, which has been around, I think you'll see something there. And there's others, and water. Those are probably the top ones that I've heard the last 6 weeks as we travel around. Now, what happens with those and how you delve into those, the devil's in the detail. But that gives you kind of an idea of where the members on the House side are talking, where they want to go and what their concerns are. And there's others, but those are kind of the top ones.
And Max, I would say that's fair to say of the Senate. All those issues are percolating up, and I think that Speaker's done a good job of articulating them.
Great. Well, and so Pro Tem, you mentioned water, so I'm going to quickly, I'm sure we could spend the rest of the time talking about water here, but wanted to quickly get your thoughts on, the settlement that was reached over the summer. I believe that was over the summer, at least in the last month or so, between groundwater, surface water users. Just want to get your quick take on that agreement, what it looks like maybe moving forward, and I'll ask the same of the speaker.
Well, let me put it to my realtor friends this way. You guys know that the value of a piece of property can be tied to these water rights. And I would say to you that if you own a piece of property with a water right to it, you would not want the legislature to determine whether or not that value is going to be gone tomorrow. So this cannot be a political process, in my opinion. You want to make sure that the system that we've had legally to determine the existence or non-existence, the priority of a piece of property's value in terms of a water right is not completely undermined. We have had prior appropriation in the state of Idaho from really our inception. And so I think we've got to be careful that this does not become a political process, that we maintain a system of jurisprudence that dictates that the prior appropriation doctrine remains in Idaho and that it protects people's investments. And so I think that's very, 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 very important. I have not seen any legislation yet, so I don't know what's coming. But what's going to hurt is when we have these dry years and there are winners and losers. And when we have those years of winners and losers, we don't want that to translate into legislation that undoes a system that has functioned very well for Idaho for many, many, many years and protected investment in real estate that has happened again for forever. So I think as realtors, you ought to be very keen on this issue, that we don't undo a system that has maintained water rights and the value of property since Idaho's inception. So I think that's really key. We gotta be very, very, very keen on not turning this into a political process and maintaining the prior appropriation doctrine.
Mr. Speaker, anything you'd like to add to, the overall water discussion?
No, I would agree with that all the way. We live in a desert, and we've got to be careful. And there's some things that need to be protected, right? We can't have people cheating, I guess is the word, taking more water than they're entitled to. That's a concern. Living in an urban area with a lot of growth, though, one of the concerns that we were actually talking about it yesterday was the issue of all the wells that go in for the culinary water for these subdivisions and the growth that are going on in my neck of the woods. If you're watching, there are fentanyl wells around the Treasure Valley also where there's a decline in the aquifer. That is a tell that we've got to be careful and how we handle this and what we do, because if we're not careful, we'll put ourselves in a worse position. We need to make sure that we're doing the same thing on this end of the state in regard to recharge. We need to do all we can to stay out of well water and go back to surface water, because if those wells goes dry, there may be no way to bring it back. So the issues are the same across the state. And I've always tied water, it's all the same, right? So as we talk about the issues in eastern Idaho, remember, as that water comes through the system and falls off the canyon to Twin Falls, or comes out down below Twin Falls, that's the same water that's used all the way along the river from Hammett and Glens Ferry and Twin Falls, all the way down till it drops back into Oregon. So we need to think of it as one system. We need to think of how we protect that system. We need to think how we expand that system. We need to be careful that we don't destroy that system, because we're all be in trouble when that happens. So yeah, there's a lot of issues here. I do agree with the pro tem too. Our appropriation doctrine is in the Constitution, and that has been the guiding principle for our state since its inception, and we've got to be careful that we don't undo or harm that too. So it's going to be a balancing act. It's my understanding from the agreement there's not necessarily a need for very much of any legislation. I'm not sure about that yet, because I haven't been through all of the agreement and seen how everybody agrees or doesn't agree, or how it all fits together. But I am happy that the folks in eastern Idaho figured out an answer or a solution to their problem. But going forward, this issue is not, it's not done. There's more to be done here to protect us from having this situation in the future and protecting our resources.
Max, I agree with the speaker. Can I just add a couple of things to that? The other thing we're going to have to be very careful of is, and this is the other side of the politics, is if curtailment happens, and it happens in large populated areas, you're going to wake up another political mess, another political giant. If you go into large urban areas and these curtailment happens in cities, and people can't water their grass, or you're turning off jobs, you're going to awaken this giant where they start to say, wait a second, we can't live our lives so that we can grow corn in eastern Idaho. You will start to see the undoing of the agricultural system and the agricultural economy to the detriment of the entire state. So this prior appropriation will be at risk. And so to see these kinds of mitigation plans and compromises take place really will protect the entire economy. So to add to what the speaker, or to confirm what the speaker said, it is good to see these kind of deals being made and to buy us some time to work out the problems. The other thing that we're really going to have to face is real estate development out in the counties in the non-incorporated areas where we're putting in these wells house by house by house, and they're not being really regulated or counted in the whole scheme of things, because those who are being curtailed are keenly aware that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of new wells going in, and they are taking the domestic exemption. And when there's going to be a shortage, and you tell these guys to turn their water off on the potatoes, there's a fight coming there, and we all better get ahead of that, because it's not going to turn out well.
Well, Pro Tem, I can tell you that I've been over the last couple of years at least been at the table with Paul Arrington and the water users. So we'll leave the domestic well discussion for a little bit later. How's that? All right. Now, this might be a little bit more difficult for the pro tem to answer just because he hasn't quite gone into a legislative session as pro tem, but curious what a typical day at the Idaho legislature during the session looks like for the Speaker of the House and for the President pro tem of the Senate. Let's start with you, Speaker Moyle.
Ooh, that's a good one. It depends on the day and what's going on. I always liken it, you start off with a plan and it changes as priorities change because the fires that start, some are bigger than others. But usually I'm at the Capitol by 6:30 or 7 in the morning, sometimes 6. First thing I try to do is have leadership meetings, meet with the leadership team, try to get a pulse of what's going on, where the issues are. And then at least once, and usually more than once a week, we'll meet with the chairman and vice chairman to see what's going on in their committees. But the first thing is to make sure everything's running smooth, to make sure that there's no issues, and then to capture those issues. And then it just goes from there, because there's a lot of people that want your ear. There's a lot of people that will have issues they want to talk about. You deal with them throughout the day. Then we'll go on the floor, have the prayer and the pledge, and we'll hear bills and go through the order as we move bills up and down, back and forth between the committees and back and forth between the Senate and the governor. And that, later in the session, that takes a lot more time than early in the session. In the meantime, you still got to make sure the committees are done. The biggest thing that the legislature has to accomplish each year is the budget. And so we spend a lot of time with our budget committee making sure the budgets are getting through, that they're getting done, and that they're working with everybody to make sure they're doing good budgets. And you'll see that again this year. My concern now is that we've got, especially this year, we'll have a lot of issues where people are going to want to kill budgets, and I think that's a bad deal. Our only constitutional requirements to do the budgets. But there's a lot of time each day dedicated to budgets also for the speaker to make sure that they're getting done. There's hundreds of those budgets, and so over 100 anyway. And so I spend a lot of time with each one of them that are working with the agencies and the bill drafters, the individuals on the committee, to make sure I know what they need, what they're hearing, what's going on, so you can kind of keep track of it. There's a lot of issues that happen, and so a typical day is not, there's never a typical day, I guess what I'm trying to say. The day changes the minute you walk through the door because you got to see what the priorities are, and it's just like farming or any other business, right? You think you were going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, but D comes up and it moves you all the way around, and all of a sudden you're focused somewhere else because you've got to put the most important fires out first. But it's great. There's a lot of running, there's a lot of watching, there's a lot of keeping track, and there's a lot of working together with others to get things done. You can't do it alone. That's why we always start off with the leadership team.
Yeah.
Totally. Go ahead.
Totally agree, Speaker. Not a typical day. I've been in leadership for 7 years. I've kind of watched this play out and I've, when you're in leadership as a majority leader, you're with the pro tem a lot. But basically, what on the Senate side, you have leadership meetings, like you said. We do meet, Speaker and all the House leadership and Senate leadership do meet with the governor once a week. And we also have a separate joint leadership meeting once a week. So we get together as House and Senate joint leadership as Republicans once a week and discuss how we're kind of going to move forward together and try to work out bugs. Just Senate leadership, Republicans work together. I have typically tried to meet with the Democrats once a week and see how we can kind of work out difficulties if there are any. And honestly, there typically aren't. I mean, what I have found in the minority party is a lot of cooperation. Very, very seldom are there disagreements. I mean, obviously there are disagreements on policy, but otherwise we get along very well and we're friends. We also do the same thing. We have a meeting with our chairman every week. And on the Senate side, we have traditionally, at least in the last few years, had a caucus meeting every week as well. On the Senate side, we are responsible for all the confirmations of the appointments of the governor. And so that's one of the big things we have to pay attention to, because we're really required by law to move those expeditiously through the Senate and make sure they're all confirmed by the end of the session. And some years that's a real challenge. So that entails us contacting the governor's office quite a bit every week, saying, where are they? Where are they? Where are they? Then getting them to committee, making sure the committee chairmen are moving those through the system, and then getting them to the floor. A lot of people don't know, but the pro tem's job is largely administrative. So I'm approving bills, I'm approving travel requests, I'm approving payroll, I'm hearing personnel complaints, that kind of stuff. It's a chief administrative officer position. And so you're doing a lot of that paper pushing almost every day on the Senate side. And I imagine on the House side, it's the same for the speaker. But so a lot of work just on that side every day as well. So it's busy, busy, busy. And then, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Senate State Affairs, you're in the committee seat 8 in the morning.
Well, I
Yeah,
appreciate
you are
that.
an agency head. You are an agency head, exactly, and I agree with you on that, Pro Tem. You'll spend a lot of time with the issues with employees and everything else. So it's just like any other business, all right? You pick your battle. Some weeks we have multiple leadership meetings if there's issues coming up. Some weeks you have multiple issues with staff, all that stuff. I don't always include the staff as one of my jobs because that's always usually, not always, but usually one of the easier ones to deal with.
Well, I appreciate the context there. Yeah, it doesn't seem like you guys are able to have meetings for meetings' sake, right? You guys are pretty hit and run the whole time. So that's interesting. One thing, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and ask you guys, you know, how you went from being I guess you could say a concerned citizen that many of us are, from the outside looking in, to making the leap to say, you know what, I'm going to run for the Idaho legislature. Speaker, how did you get involved in all this mess?
I hate taxes, and the guy that was here before that I replaced, there was a incumbent, a really nice guy. We became friends through the years. It was all over taxes. At that time, Idaho's income tax rate was about 8.2%. I think corporate was 8.4%. And I didn't like paying taxes. And the individual that I replaced was voted for another tax increase. And I tried to get somebody else to do it. Nobody would run. So I put my name in, and then I didn't want to look like that bad and lose by a big margin. So I worked my butt off, and I ended up winning by 13 votes after the recount. The taxes were the only reason I ever came here. If you've watched what I do, it's always about taxes. I've cut more taxes. Anybody on Idaho history, I'll continue that fight till I leave. And that's how I got here, just taxes.
What about you, Pro Tem? What was the catalyst for you?
You know, it's kind of a funny, I mean, it's kind of a cheesy story. I'll tell you, you know, I went to University of Idaho, went to law school there, and I was newlywed. I ran for student body president. I won. And it was kind of an unpleasant experience. And the politics of it were surprisingly ugly. And my wife and I saw that, and we made a promise to each other then and there that we would never, ever get involved in politics again. We made the promise to each other that we said, if we want to get involved in the public, if we want to serve our community, there are millions of places. We can do the 4-H club, the Rotary Club, the church, whatever. We can do things. But what happened in my career was I ended up being, in my law practice, the city attorney for 4 different cities. I was a highway district attorney. I ended up being involved in the community on that capacity. And I got to know a lot of people. And when Dean Cameron, who was my senator in the Idaho State Senate, retired, there was a vacancy. And because I was known and because I was, I hope, trusted, the calls started pouring in. And then you kind of realize you can't afford not to be involved. And so if there's anybody on this webinar who thinks you can't, you know, you can afford not to be involved and expect things to turn out, you're just fooling yourself. And so as that swell kind of happened, and I was involved in the Republican Party, we started to change our minds about this non-involvement policy that we had. And so I threw my name in with the Republicans and got nominated, and Butch Otter appointed me. And then there I was. And so I kept running, and here I am.
Well, it's interesting, you know, kind of when you guys tell me the story of how you go from concerned citizen to elected official, it sounds a lot like the leadership stories that I've heard from my members, many of which are on this call now. You know, you kind of feel compelled, people ask, and that's just kind of how that goes. So interesting take on that. I guess the next logical question would be, so you get elected. What made you say, well, I think I'm going to take the further step and I'm going to run for leadership? Pro Tem, why don't you start with that one?
I'll tell you what it was, is the Idaho Senate was a seniority-based system. And when I went into the Senate, I was ranked 34 out of 35. And at that time in the Idaho State Senate, there were a lot of senior members who were looking as though they weren't leaving anytime soon. And what I realized was I wasn't going to get a chairmanship anytime soon. I wasn't going to get on any good committees anytime soon. And somebody said to me, if you want to get in the room, right, if you want to make a difference, your only pathway is going to be leadership, because you're going to be in the Senate for 20 years before you get a seat at the table. And so the caucus chair position opened, and there were like 5 people run for it, and we duked it out, and I came up the winner. And I was there for 3 years, and then I ran for majority leader. So that's how I got into leadership.
Speaker, what about you? What made you decide to run for assistant majority leader, that first kind of leadership race?
Oh, it was kind of a weird deal. The speaker and I were good friends. I'd only been in the legislature 4 years, and there was some movement in the leadership team, and we visited, and I ran. It was kind of because a friend asked me to do it, and it started there and been blessed ever since. It was assistant majority leader, then later I ran for majority leader, and then here recently for speaker. But it wasn't something I aspired to. It wasn't something that I'm going to do that. It was just kind of one of those, hey, I'd sure like to have you help me out here a little bit. And he was a good friend, Bruce Newcomb, and I ran. It wasn't a planned thing. It just kind of happened.
So I'm going to have a couple more questions, but before I get to kind of the final questions that I have, I do want to remind folks on the call, if you do have a question for either the pro tem or the speaker, please put those in the chat, and we'll reserve some time at the end to address some of those questions. But before we get there, I want to quickly ask this question, and Speaker Moyle mentioned a little bit about taxes, and I think income taxes maybe specifically, but as you guys know, our membership is keenly aware of Idaho's tax structure, whether that's income taxes, property taxes. Can you tell us anything that you know or think might be coming down in the 2025 legislative session as far as Idaho's tax structure, whether that's income tax, property tax, you name it? Speaker, we'll start with you.
Yeah, the income tax is where I've always focused, because our income tax rates are still too high. We've got them flat now, and your first 5,000 is exempt, but there's more to do there. We need to be under 5 to be competitive, I think. The issue to watch this session in particular will be the issue of the sales tax off of food. That's about a $400+ million hole, and that will basically take everything anybody else wants to do out of the equation. I know there's a lot of support to do that. There's also talk of raising the credit. I don't know how that's going to work out. We'll see what the committees decide, but that's kind of the elephant in the room, depending on what happens there. I ran the bill to take it off years ago and got it through the House and on the Senate floor, and they killed it. But looking at it now, I think it's wiser to raise the credit and give it to Idaho citizens. I call it the tourist tax, because you've got 40 to 50 million people a year that come to Idaho and they pay that tax. You've got illegal people here that pay that tax. It's the only tax a lot of people pay, and most Idahoans, not all, but most do better with the credit. They get more back than that they pay on sales tax on food. If you do take sales tax off food too, you're going to have to define what food is, right? So in some states, I'm told that a big marshmallow is food, but a little one is fishing bait, so it's taxed. One of the biggest, if you use the SNAP definition, one of the biggest items that is sales tax exempt is soda pop and candy, and I don't think that soda pop and candy should count as food. So you open this can of worms you have to deal with. The other issue you talked about is the property tax issue. In the last couple of years, the legislature has provided over $500 million in property tax relief. The issue has been that some see relief and some don't, because remember, property tax isn't collected by the state. It's collected locally and it's spent locally. We can put parameters around it, but those decisions locally determine what happens with that. And since we've relieved about $500 million in property taxes, I'm told, and I don't have the final number yet, and I'll try to get it, there's been over 300 million in increased growth in budgets in those local taxing districts. I don't know how you get your arm around, you can't just keep taking general fund monies and sending them out and have property taxes go up. People get mad and they blame the legislature. I don't know how to educate people that they understand it's a local issue. You know, they need to be involved in those local budgets and what's going on there, because that's where those decisions are made. And that's a hard learning curve. And property tax is kind of a problem anyways, because I think they're due, this week, right before Christmas, we go out and tell people, pay your taxes. I think it's the most hated of all the taxes. It's the one we get the most complaints about. At least that's what I get the most complaints about. And it's the one that's done locally and not at the legislative branch. The property tax, you've seen the last couple of years, though, we've tried to adjust that. We've tried to fix that. And the impact has not been as great as it should have been because of the increased spending. Another thing to remember, the state sends back, over 20%, I believe, of the sales tax now to local taxing entities through the distribution of the sales tax back. There's also more that goes into that with TECM and other issues. You get to a point where the state can't afford to keep doing that. We're just taking it out of one of your pockets and putting it in your other one. And somehow we've got to educate people on how the property tax works and let them know, when we subsidize the property tax, that means we can't cut income tax. That means we can't cut sales tax. It puts the legislature in a bind. You kind of saw that this year. The sales tax is the one thing that comes in monthly that's used to pay the bills. And we had a couple of months, I am told, and I'll know more when we get here in January, where we had to do what's a CAN, or a tax anticipation note, because there wasn't enough sales tax coming in because it's already on autopilot to go out for roads or to go out for the cities and the counties and the school districts and everything else. So we've got to be really careful that we don't blow up a good system too. So there's a lot of talk on that one, but the property tax is kind of the harder nut to crack. And it's one of the ones you'll hear about this year. I just don't know. I don't know how to fix it.
First of all, let's remember that Idahoans have received more tax cuts per capita than any other state in the United States over the last few years. I mean, historic tax cuts. And the speaker has been a great supporter of that and a champion of that. I feel proud that I've been able to vote for all those historic tax cuts in my term in the Idaho State Senate. We've delivered tax cuts. Grocery tax. I feel very confident in saying this. I don't think there's a single Idaho legislator who believes that there should not be grocery tax relief, or that an Idahoan should pay tax on food. The question is, how do you deliver it? What is the mechanism that is effective? And anybody who really thinks about this needs to ask the question. It's this simple. A grocery store in Boise knows when you walk through the door how much you're willing to pay for a gallon of milk. Don't fool yourself. They probably know on your phone. I mean, they have your data. And it depends on which neighborhood you walk in, what the price of milk's going to be. So if the state of Idaho takes 12 cents off the price of your milk when you walk in the door on a $2 gallon of milk, they take the tax off of it. What's to keep that grocery store from raising the price of that gallon to $2.12? You follow? You can take the tax off of it. Are you not just creating a windfall for the grocery store? This is the difficulty of taking the tax off of food. Can you really deliver the tax relief to an Idahoan? The tax credit delivers that tax relief. The other part of it is if you get rid of that tax credit and you take it off at the grocery store, people need to understand their income tax will go up. When they go to the accountant, they're going to pay some more income tax. So it's easy to, do bumper sticker politics on this issue. But we really ought to be talking about good policy and delivering grocery tax relief, because I firmly believe that every single legislator wants to deliver it. But we got to be smart on how we deliver it. It's going to be an issue this year. But other than that, I think we've done a really good job in Idaho delivering tax relief. We're going to keep talking about it because it's a conservative Republican state. We know that driving tax relief drives a good economy, and we've proven it.
Well, appreciate that. So we're getting close to the end. A quick reminder, if you do have questions for either the pro tem or the speaker, please put those in the chat. But as we kind of get towards the end here, I do want you guys to kind of give us your parting remarks or any thoughts as we leave today. But one thing I want you to consider as you do that, Idaho Realtors are, as you know, very involved locally in all of their communities, at the state level, at the national level. Is there anything that we can do as an organization to help either the House majority or Senate majority as we move into 2025 and beyond? Because we're always there to help and assist where we can, especially when it comes to data, anything like that. So as you offer your kind of closing remarks, please let us know what we can do to be helpful to you guys. So Pro Tem, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So I will tell you, I've been fascinated with the recent story that says in the next 10 years, the median home price in Boise will exceed $1 million. I'll bet you guys are excited about that.
I would imagine so, but I think we also, I mean, one of our main priorities this session will be to, I think ultimately to address some of that is to up our inventory across the board with housing options for folks. But
well,
go ahead.
I'm just teasing a little bit, but I think that's a fascinating story. And what it really tells is that Idaho has been remarkably successful. And I think that it also tells that story about cutting taxes, lowering regulation, providing predictability for business. This is the success story that we have in Idaho. I think it could be repeated in other states if they'd pay attention. But Idaho is a great place to live. It's a great place to be a realtor. I think that we're going to continue to have that success. And we're going to continue to see, struggles with that low inventory, with a tight labor market and with some inflation. I mean, honestly, I think we're going to continue to have some inflation. I would say to you in terms of how you can help, look, the Idaho legislature is drafting about 900 bills a year. And of those 900 bills, we're introducing over 400 of those a year. And of those 400, we're passing over 300. And if you think about that volume in the terms of 3 months, it's a marathon. And so I rely on my local realtors in District 27, who I appreciate very much and know, I know them, I trust them. Please contact your local legislators when you see a problem, because often it's not intended. We need your expertise. We need you to be involved in this process. The fact that you're having this forum is so much appreciated. We need your expertise. Let us know that we're not doing something that will completely cause a problem for your industry, for your customers, for your people, because we're not trying to do that. We want to see your business continue to succeed. We want to make sure that Idaho continues to have a good place for your kind of business to move forward. So help us out. When you see a problem, please contact us, and we want to be a resource for you.
Speaker, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I've always appreciated y'all. You know that. Max, you've always done a good job of keeping me informed. One of the things I love about the realtors is they keep me informed. And I'll give you an example. Here recently, I've had a couple of my realtor friends come and visit with me about their concerns with the cost of permits for new housing, and they feel that it's causing one of the biggest problems with getting getting some surplus or some homes to sell, that permit fees are driving them out and driving up the cost of housing. And it was good to have that ability to have those people come to me and say, this is the problem, how do you help, right? So I've always appreciated that about you. You've always been very supportive. The one thing I would caution my realtor friends, is that, and I kind of talked about this at the start, this out-of-state money coming to Idaho will hurt us all if we don't address it. And I hope, Max, that going forward we can work together to help solve that issue, because it's not going to get any better and it's going to affect us all. But the best part about the whole thing, you guys, you've been very supportive financially. You've let us know what's going on. And I've always appreciated the fact that, you'll tell me if there's a problem, and you'll get involved to fix problems when they exist. And we need to keep that going. And that's what I would ask of you. Just let us know what we need to do to help you.
Well, Pro Tem, Speaker, I really appreciate you. I know that all of our members really appreciate you and your efforts, not only in the past, but obviously moving forward as well. I think if we don't have any questions in the chat, which I don't see, I'm going to let you guys get out of here a few minutes early. That probably doesn't happen very often. So I'm going to take advantage of that. One thing I'll mention to our members is that we do have our Idaho Realtor Day at the Capitol coming up on February 4th of 2025. So put that on your calendars. And I'll be certainly speaking with the pro tem and the speaker to participate in that moving forward as well. So with that, I appreciate everyone and appreciate the participation and the time of the pro tem and the speaker today. So with that, thank you very much and have a very Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate it, everybody. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.